Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, I'm going to walk you through my methods for 3 different blending effects using metallic watercolors. So I'm using the Fine Tech metallic watercolors right here. They show up amazingly on black cardstock. So I am using Astro Brights in Eclipse Black right here. It's a nice sturdy cardstock, so it's a little thicker than paper, which holds up really well because we do need to use water to get our really cool effects. So as you can see, these are the 3 different blending effects that we're going to walk through. So we have a rainbow blending effect, a shadow blending effect, and then a stackable where the colors kind of change and fade as you move down different lines. So you'll need some black cardstock, you'll need your watercolors, and then I'm using a Pentel water brush. It is the fine tip, so it's the finest tip that they make right here, which works the best. I've experimented a lot with just traditional paintbrushes and then water brushes, and water brushes work really well. One thing to know going into using these Fine Tech metallic watercolors is that they dry really quick. So your watercolors can get really thick really fast, which is why there's a few different things to keep in mind when you are creating color blends as opposed to traditional watercolors. Okay, so I'm going to set these aside. I'm going to start with these 2 palettes right here. I'm going to grab a new sheet of my black cardstock, and we're going to do the rainbow one first. So I'm going to open these up. You can get a smaller palette like this that has a bunch of colors, or you can purchase larger individual colors and create your own palettes, which is what I've done with this one and with this one. I'll leave a link to everything mentioned in this video right in the video description, so you'll have access to everything used. So when you're creating this rainbow effect, one thing that I've learned helps a lot is starting with a really bright color. So I'm going to be using this white color right here as my base just to draw out my letters, and then we'll start building our colors on top of it. It'll make a much more vibrant result, and it makes it a lot easier to have a really beautiful lettering outcome because you kind of have a base that you're working from instead of trying to match things up as you add color by color. So I'm just going to grab some white right here, and you'll notice when you start using these that it does take quite a bit of water to start to loosen them up because of that thick nature of them by default, but you just want enough where you can get a good base. It doesn't have to be very thick. It doesn't have to be very obvious. This is kind of like your pencil sketch to just start things off. So I'm just going to write out rainbow right here. Okay, so now that I've got my base, I want to make sure that it fully dries before I start adding other colors, because if you start going when it's already wet, the colors will muddy a little bit and you won't have this really vibrant result that you get over here. So I'm going to let that dry and then I'll be right back. Okay, so we're all dry now, and I'm going to be using this palette so I can put this one away for now because I'm not going to use any other of those colors. And I want to use my blue, my green, my pink, and my purple for this. So I generally stick between 4 to 5 colors. I actually think I might use a little bit of my golden orange out of here as well. So I'm going to set this over here for later. Okay, so what I do is I just start with one color. I place that color throughout my word, and then I move on to another color. So I'm going to start, you can start with any color that you choose, and you're just going to randomly place the colors. So I'm going to start with my purple right here, and make sure you get a good amount on your brush this time because you want these colors to be really obvious. And you're just going to choose random places to put the color, and you can choose how much of the color you put on each letter and where you put that color. So I'm just going to come through the word. I usually like where the shadow would be, where this underside of the A is, to put some of my darker colors. It just adds a little more depth to everything. All right, so I'm going to go through the rest of the word and then I'll be right back. Okay, and once again, you want to make sure it fully dries before you move on to your next color. You want to have a paper towel close by, and you just want to make sure you get all the color out of the bristles of your water brush before you move on to your next color. So I'm going to grab my pink next, and I'm just going to go through each of these colors and just put these little color blocks in all these areas, wait for it to dry, move on to the next color. So I'm going to speed up the video and just follow this exact same process until I finish the entire word, until I don't see any more of this white that I initially laid down remaining. so that is blending effect number 1, the rainbow blend. So blocks of colors on top of a base that we created ahead of time. All right, so we're going to move on to the stackable one next since it relates pretty directly to the rainbow one. So I'm going to grab a new sheet of cardstock right here. And once again, I'm going to grab my white to create that base. And we want to make that base nice and light. So we're going to get those initial letters first. That way we can add in our final colors and they'll kind of jump forward because they've got that base to kind of help them rise up and be much more vibrant. So I'm just going to write out stackable and stack it, obviously. So the more water you have on your brush with the watercolors, the lighter your outcome will be. So if you don't want it this dark, just add a little extra water and it'll be a much lighter base. And once again, this is just one word that's been stacked just to go over this blending option. But realistically, you would have a bunch of different words on each line and then you could fade the colors that way too if this becomes a little difficult from a readability standpoint. All right, so then you just want to choose your colors. You can choose any kind of random colors or a color story, anything that you'd like to try and fade from one to the next. So this is more of an abrupt fade right here. I want to show you what a gradual fade would look like. So it looks a little more like an ombre rather than just a hard gradient right here. So we're going to choose colors that are a little similar family-wise just to show that fade a little bit better. So I'm going to start with a light green up at the top. So once again, you want to make sure that this is totally dry before you start. And luckily, these metallic watercolors do dry really fast. So I'm just going to start with this lighter green. And once again, the more water you have on the brush, the lighter it's going to be. And I want this to be kind of dark. So I'm going to grab paint from an area that isn't quite as wet right here. And that'll just make the color stand out much better. And just follow the guide and come about halfway down your letters. Okay, so if you're ever unsure of where to stop with your color, just kind of imagine an invisible line that goes straight across, and that'll help you to know how far down you should go on your other letters. Because when you have, letters that have ascenders like the T and then others that kind of live in the X height like an A, it can seem like you need to go further down with the A, but not really if you look at this line that kind of comes across right here. All right. So now we want this to gradually fade into a darker green. So I'm going to grab my darker green and it's still kind of wet, which is nice for creating that fade, that gradual fade. So I'm just going to pick up and kind of let it bleed into the lighter color wherever it's still wet, just to emphasize that this is a more gradual fade. And because my colors are more similar, it does help give that gradual fade a better look or effect. And if you have any areas that look a little hard, just clean off the tip of your brush so there's just a little bit of water on it, and then you can kind of bleed the two together nice and lightly. Okay, so now that we go from a light green to a dark green, we want to carry our dark green into the top parts of the second row of letters. So I'm just going to come in here and go about halfway down again. All right, so we've got our green. It's still a little bit wet, so now we're going to move into a dark blue. So I'm going to grab my dark blue. Another way that you can create that fade where the transition occurs is just dotting where the previous color was while it's still wet, and that will create a natural transition right there. So just get a little bit of paint on your brush, dot that part, and then pull it forward. So now we want to bring in our dark blue into the tops of these ones, bring them halfway, and then we're going to finish off with a lighter blue. Okay, so this is fully dry now, and you can kind of see the nice comparison of this ombre fade on a stackable example of text versus the hard line. So you could do either one. If you want to use different colors that are significantly different from each other, then this would be the way to go. So you don't get that muddy transition area, you'll want to make sure that each color is totally dry before you move on to the next color. If you choose to do more of an ombre look like this, you want to make sure that your preceding color is still wet so you can fade into it really nicely with that transition, and just use colors that are similar to each other so it looks more believable as that really gradual ombre fade. So that is our stackable example, and the last thing we're going to do is do a shadow example. So we've got some nice fades where there's shadows within the letters, and this time we're going to use our golden orange so it stands out really well. So I'm going to grab this and I'm just going to write it out. And this time you want to make sure that your letters are really vibrant and rich. You don't want them to be too light. So I'm going to make sure I have a lot of paint that's not too watery on the tip of my bristles, because I'm going to put in those shadow areas later on, and I'm going to need that contrast between really dense watercolor and then very lightly applied watercolor. And now you want to make sure that it's fully dry before you move on to the next part. So I'm going to let this dry and then I'll be right back. Okay, so this is our last step. So basically what we're doing right here is we're lifting color up to reveal these shadow areas. So we need less color in the areas to imply that there's shadows there. So I'm just going to make sure that my brush is thoroughly dry right here. You just want a little bit of water on the end of it, but I don't want any color on the tips of my bristles. So then you're just going to come in and wherever you want to put a shadow, like since this stroke overlaps the bottom part of the S, that's where I want the shadow to occur. So I'll just come in here, wet it slightly, and then go back to my paper towel and get that color off of my bristles and come back in. Once again, my bristles are just slightly wet, so it's just enough to start picking up that color in that area, and then make that transition nice and smooth right here. You can dot it a little bit, and that really helps with that transition. And then I also want the shadow up here on the top part. Let me turn this around so it's a little easier. You don't want to put your hand in work that you've already done while it's still wet. So I'm just going to pull up some color, get it off on my paper towel, and just move throughout my letters like this. And this will give you that shadow effect throughout your letters. You're just pulling up color, and once it dries, you'll see how nice that looks. So the next place that we would want our shadow to be is right where this stroke hits the H, just a little bit of shadow right here. And then this whole stroke right here, we'll get the next one. This stroke. Okay, and then you just want to allow the entire thing to dry, and then you can see those effects in there, especially when you hold it in the light. You can see the metallic watercolor, how pretty that really looks. So those are 3 different blending effects for metallic watercolors. And once again, all the links to everything that was used within this video are available in the video description. So just click in the video description, you'll have access to everything. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe, and don't forget to head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com, for even more design and lettering tutorials and a bunch of freebies. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.